Deadpool and Wolverine just broke $200 million in its opening weekend, making it the 8th most successful opening weekend for Marvel Studios ever. But that's not even the best part of this weekend for the studio, because they also have Robert Downey Jr. again, as he's coming back to play Doctor Doom. So I felt like with all this crazy Marvel news, and honestly the studio bouncing back from a pretty rough 4 years, why don't we take a look at all 34 films and rank them from best to worst? Starting with the first one, Iron Man. Iron Man is an S, obviously. We got Jon Favreau, Robert Downey Jr., his first time in the role. Jeff Bridges as a really good villain, and the whole thing starts off really strongly. So we're going S for Iron Man. Louis Leterrier's Hulk, it's when you compare it to what comes up, it's certainly better than those movies, but it's nothing great. So we'll go see with the caveat that Edward Norton is a pretty strong Bruce Banner, and some of the Hulk action scenes in this movie are awesome. And they're honestly the only solo Hulk movie action scenes we have. So for that, it's going C. Iron Man 2, a disappointing film, but we did get Jon Favreau back directing it again. And while, some of it is really bad, other parts are great. The action's pretty strong, and Mickey Rourke, I think, is pretty decent as Whiplash. Obviously, Justin Hammer and Sam Rockwell's a little bit tough to watch. But I believe this movie also did give us Don Cheadle as Rhodey, which I would say is a pretty decent step up from Terrence Howard. You might have to check my math on that, though. Next up, Thor. Thor, I'm going B. I think the production design and sets of Thor are fantastic. I think it looks great. I prefer serious Thor to kind of the more comic Thor films. And so for that reason, I think it's a pretty strong candidate for the B category. First Avenger, I'll also go B. I think it's pretty strong, especially again when you compare it to other movies in the franchise, especially later on. So yeah, I mean, is Joe Johnston the most visually interesting director in the MCU? No. Is the movie particularly well made? Not necessarily, but I do think it's better made than, again, a lot of the movies coming up in this list. So it's a B. Um, Avengers original, it's got to be S just because of the impact it had. I think at this point we're 6 movies in, and we have, basically if it ended here, we'd have one of the strongest franchise ever. And interesting to think about that. You've got Iron Man as your anchor character throughout the whole series. But if this was a tight 6 movies, that'd be a pretty satisfying story being told. So really just thinking about the MCU in phase 1, it's pretty impressive what they were able to throw together. And then we got Iron Man 3, which I would argue is an A. I think Shane Black is one of the more interesting directors that has ever played with this franchise. And for that reason, it's going A. I think it's pretty funny compared to most movies. I think it's more interestingly directed in a lot of different ways. And yeah, the third act is not the strongest, but it's a fun movie. Next up is Thor: The Dark World, and it's one of the worst movies in this entire franchise, so we're going D. I don't even remember who directed it. I don't really know anything about it. I just know something about the ether, and Natalie Portman is not great in this film. Winter Soldier, one of the best in the entire franchise, immediately afterwards, which is crazy, and that's an S. Joe Russo, Anthony Russo coming on, first Marvel movie they've ever done, and it's grounded. It's a political thriller. I'm really hoping A Brave New World is this exact vibe again. It sounds like it will be. Kevin Feige has teased it that way at Comic-Con, so we'll see. And followed by Guardians of the Galaxy, which I would say is an A. I think James Gunn is fantastic. I think it's a very unique movie, especially at this point in the Marvel, story. This is really when we realize, oh, wow, they can get weird with it. They can introduce us to characters we never thought we'd ever see in a movie, and it totally paid off for them. So at the time, I remember this being a huge risk and everyone being worried, but it hugely paid off. And I actually saw it early, like in an IMAX theater. I was like, it was just a really fun experience. So I remember this being like peak MCU vibes. And then Avengers Age of Ultron, again, I'm still, at this point, I'm locked into the MCU. Like, I'm seeing every movie. I loved Avengers Ultron. I thought it was, I think actually, if at the time I thought it was better than the first one. Now, I don't think the impact on the whole franchise is the same. You got to be impressed by the original, but I liked Ultron, and I thought there was moments that really stuck with me. It's crazy what they did with Quicksilver, but at the same time, Wanda was introduced in this movie, and she kind of paid off, so. Ant-Man is a tough watch for me. I think it's a C. It's funny, kind of. I bet Edgar Wright would have done such a good job with it. I just think Peyton Reed is a really, soulless director and doesn't really bring anything to the table. Civil War, on the other hand, is an S. It's the Russos again. A banger. It's an Avengers movie. Come on. At this point, it's the best Avengers movie. And, Spider-Man being in this movie was, I remember at the time, again, while Ant-Man didn't necessarily do it for me, I'm still riding really high on the MCU at this point. Civil War really feels like, a big high point for the franchise. And I remember it being a big moment and the advertising just being obviously pitting Captain America against Iron Man. That's going to sell some tickets. So definitely peak MCU moments. Doctor Strange, I'll go B. It's well made. It's got great visual effects. I think Benedict Cumberbatch is a pretty strong Stephen Strange, but it's pretty slow for me, and I don't love the final act of this movie. I think this is one of the weaker ones. It just drags, and it starts off in a really interesting place. I'm not a huge Scott Derrickson guy, I've found. Like, I always get bought into his movies because he's so, I think, charismatic as a person, but his movies don't do it for me, and I think this movie suffers from classic, like, disconnect from Scott Derrickson's style for me, but it's pretty good. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, I'm not going to say it's as good as the first one. I'll go B, but I think it's a good time, and I think Kurt Russell's a fun time. I think the whole cast is back at it again. I also loved James Gunn not being afraid to get weird with it. So I have vivid memories of, like, the Sylvester Stallone moments in this movie, and just, like, all the weirdness of it, I actually really enjoy. That was probably my favorite part. Followed by Spider-Man Homecoming, the first solo Spider-Man movie in the MCU. I'll go A. I think at the time I remember being pretty bought into Tom Holland. I'm still enjoying these movies at this point in my journey as a film lover. So for me, I think, pretty strong A. And Tom Holland had a bright future in the MCU. I thought also Michael Keaton as the Vulture was a great casting choice. It was weird seeing him come back to superhero movies after being so adamantly against it. And I also think this was after Birdman, which is even more kind of hilarious. Birdman really was, like, such an interesting movie for that man to have made and then go back and make a Spider-Man movie followed by a DC movie reclaiming Bat. Anyways, it's crazy. But Thor Ragnarok, I know you guys love this movie. For me, it's a C, honestly. I don't think it's that good. I know this is my hot take. I know you guys are going to rip me a new one for this one, but I don't think it's that good. And I think Thor Love and Thunder kind of exposes every reason I didn't like this movie. Here's my hypothesis on Thor Ragnarok. The marketing and the trailer and the Hulk scene was so good. And just like in general, the tone shift and the way Taika was allowed to make it his own, I think that was enough to surprise people in the theater to think it was good. But it was never good. It was never good. And, like, sure, Cate Blanchett is good. But the movie itself has, I don't know. I have to rewatch it, I guess, to have, like, a great opinion. But for me, I just never thought it was that funny. I didn't have a good time in the theater. And we'll get to Love and Thunder. But yeah, I don't know. Black Panther for me is a solid A. Do I think it's perfect? No, not even close to being perfect. But it's so strong, and I think what it did for the MCU at the time was one of the best movies in this era of the MCU. I also thought the opening, one of the strongest first half hour of any Marvel movie ever. I remember being stoked in the theater at how well it was made. I think Ryan Coogler is just awesome in that way. So I would have liked to see him kind of continue doing his thing, because when it becomes a Marvel movie, I'm less into it. But then we've got one of the absolute best superhero movies ever made, and that's Avengers Infinity War, which, inarguably has to be S. And the ending is really the talking point here, because what a brave move on Disney's part to do that. Obviously, we all know something's up and something's going to happen. Something's going to be, fixed from this. But it was still pretty bold to have people walk out of the theater being completely left, with nothing, right? Like, imagine if it was a bad movie. If it was a bad movie, it's like compounded how bad it is. Everyone's pissed. But because it was so fantastic, that cliffhanger worked so well and set us up to forgive Ant-Man and the Wasp, because Ant-Man and the Wasp is a D, and so is Captain Marvel's a C. So we'll talk about both these together, because this is the thing that was in between the Infinity War Endgame sandwich, right? It's like the meat of the sandwich. They chose to put two of the weakest movies in the entire franchise between two of the best, and as a result, as you're watching them, you're thinking to yourself, what happened? Because Ant-Man and the Wasp is not only not funny at all, to me, it's really bad. Like, Peyton Reed again, who is this guy, and why is he making these movies? They're very, very bad. Captain Marvel, I like more than Ant-Man and the Wasp, but Carol Danvers is horribly written, and like Ryan Fleck and Anna Boden didn't really do anything with this. It just felt like Kevin Feige kicked it along. And the Marvel stuff, if it was directed well, could have been really good. I think this, seeing Samuel L. Jackson in a big part was great. I like Ben Mendelsohn riffing with him. I thought there was enough here to make it a good movie, and complete fumble. And then you got Endgame. Again, one of the best ever. My personal favorite of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'll say it. It's my favorite. I remember in the theater discovering what the movie is, right? Because all of us, I mean, I wasn't a person who was interested in looking up spoilers, right? So I go to the theater and I sit in the seat and I'm like, okay, I don't know what this movie is going to be. And they didn't even have to tell us, right? Because we were all so excited to go. And like discovering the plot and what I was about to experience, like it truly, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but like it truly resembled like getting on a roller coaster because you're sitting down, you don't know what your experience is going to be, and then you're just thrown through one of the most exciting movies as someone who's invested at this point a decade of your life into these movies. This payoff is unfucking real. And like, that is the success story of the MCU. Everything after this, right, we're going to talk about because this is when it gets interesting. But this, what we're looking at here, these movies are an incredible success story. An incredible success story. I mean, it's just insane what they were able to accomplish. And then you've got Far From Home, which follows it up, and I think is probably the worst of the Spider-Man movies in the MCU. I'll go see with it. I have no interest in rewatching this movie. Um, it's pretty nothing to me. And Black Widow is basically the same. Yeah, I love Florence Pugh in this movie, and I honestly, it wasn't until yesterday that I actually came around Thunderbolts actually not being the most boring movie on earth because of Florence Pugh, and just seeing how charismatic and everyone, how excited everyone is about it. I think that cast has a chance to be really fun. Like everyone looks to be having a great time with each other, so that excites me. But Black Widow itself, this is so forgettable. I don't really remember much about it. Shang-Chi, though, I do really like. I'm going to go A with Shang-Chi. I like this movie a lot. I thought the action was really freaking cool. I thought Daniel Destin Cretton was really, really, exciting when he was cast. I love Short Term 12. I like his other movies. And, like, the scaffolding fight scene at the club is awesome. The fight scene in the car in San Francisco is awesome. There's just a lot of cool action in this movie. I think that delivered for me over everything else kind of sucking. Eternals. Eternals is okay. Hear me out on Eternals. The production design is great. The cinematography is great compared to the other movies in this franchise. Yes, it's bad. It's very bad, but it's certainly not as bad as these two movies. And again, like it did some things better than most movies on this list. Most movies, especially after Phase One. Eternals looks better than a lot of them and has some pretty cool stuff in it. But yeah, I mean, if you paid me to rewatch it, I'd be kind of having a problem with it. Then No Way Home. I'm gonna go B with No Way Home. The first time I saw it, I really enjoyed it. It has cool stuff in it. It really loses its pizzazz after the first viewing, and I don't love what they did with my boy Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin. I felt kind of disappointed by that situation. And again with Doc Ock too. So I don't know. It's good. I get why everyone loves it. Multiverse of Madness is a C. It's kind of a mess. It's such a mess. And the cameos meant nothing to me. They were fine and fun. I wasn't mad at them existing, but like they weren't enough to give me anything out of this. And in general, it was just an absolute mess of a movie. It felt like a total clusterfuck. I didn't know what I was even doing watching that movie, to be honest with you. Thor Love and Thunder is the worst movie in the MCU, I think. I think it's the worst movie in the entire MCU. Unbearable watching experience in the theater. I have nothing but horrible memories of the experience watching this movie and the hatred I had for it. And there will be no movie worse than this that has ever come out of the MCU. They would have to, honestly, like, really murder a child in the movie in order for it to somehow be worse than this, because this is one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my entire life. Followed by Wakanda Forever, which I think is an A, and I think is as good as the first one. I'm obviously very disappointed in the passing of Chadwick Boseman. That had a huge effect on this movie. It cannot go like really unspoken because it's such a massive part of it. But Namor, for me, Namor is what carried this. And I thought he was such a cool villain, and I cannot wait to see him pop up anywhere else ever again because of how damn cool he is. In fact, I'm pretty disappointed we haven't seen him yet pop up again, but damn, I mean, he's so badass, you know? So for that alone, him being one of probably my top 3 villains in this entire franchise. And then, you know, when he freaking shoots the whale, what I don't even know. This is so crazy. All right, 4 more. Quantumania. Quantumania is going to be another D. It's really bad. I didn't hate it as much as Thor: Love and Thunder. Somehow, Peyton Reed is still better than this movie. But this is the apex of Peyton Reed. Why are you making movies for this franchise? And this might be the worst Marvel movie in terms of how it looks. This movie looks horrible. Guardians of the Galaxy 3, I'm sorry, guys. I don't like that movie at all. I like the first 2 quite a bit, but the third one is not nearly as good. I feel like James Gunn was pretty much done with it by the time he even got to make it. And then he was also thinking about his new job a little bit on the horizon because I think he was already being courted by the time he had made Suicide Squad. I think all that, you can feel it all in this movie. I think he probably spent, if I had to guess, a third of the time crafting what this movie would be compared to the first one. And it just all hinges on one storyline of Rocket. And I'm not saying that's a bad storyline, but when I'm watching an ensemble movie and I don't care about anyone except for one character, and that one character's not even in most of the movie, it's just not very good. And then you've got the Marvels, which is another one that I couldn't even get through. To be honest with you, I didn't finish this movie. I tried, but it just didn't have anything in it for me. I think if I'd watched maybe some of the shows, the only TV show I watched in this entire Marvel show thing is WandaVision. And I liked WandaVision, but I tried to watch every other show to an extent. I tried, and I couldn't get into them. And this just felt like an extension of the Disney Plus stuff. So hardcore that I had no endpoint to care about it. Deadpool and Wolverine. What do we think, guys? For me, Deadpool and Wolverine, God, it's so tough because I had so much fun in this movie. I had so much fun in this movie, but I also acknowledge all of its faults. And so I think because of that, it's got to be A, because while I didn't love it, maybe in terms of the iconic moments I had in the theater for these films, I think it probably on a story level and a filmmaking level and compared to all of these movies, it's gotta be A. But if you guys haven't seen Deadpool and Wolverine yet, I'm not gonna spoil anything for you here. I'm just gonna tell you that you should absolutely go see the film. It's, I think, a high point for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think it excites me about what's coming up with Avengers Doomsday and Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four. That footage looks pretty promising. I saw a leak of it. I thought it looked awesome. So yeah, I mean, I think maybe we're at a turning point because I think by doing this exercise, it's fair to say right after Endgame, I just kind of fell off caring. And some of the movies poked through, like Shang-Chi and Wakanda Forever. But most of them kind of just bounced off, and I was like, at best I liked it okay. This is the first one to be potentially an S tier for me. Deadpool, I just love Wolverine. First of all, I think the X-Men movies are some of my favorite superhero movies. And yeah, I mean, it just really did it for me. So it's going A. And with that, guys, we got our final tier list. I'll make it bigger for you. All right, and that's the tier list, guys. We got S tier. We got Iron Man, Avengers, Winter Soldier, Civil War, Avengers Infinity War, and Endgame. So I think it's fair to say we like the Russos over here. I'm excited for what's coming up. I mean, they've got a basically impeccable track record for me. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, their other movies, no, they're so bad. It's crazy how bad they are. But in this system, they work very well. A tier, Iron Man 3, Guardians of the Galaxy, Age of Ultron, Homecoming, Black Panther, Shang-Chi, Wakanda Forever, and Deadpool and Wolverine. B tier, Thor, The First Avenger, Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and Spider-Man No Way Home. C tier, The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Ant-Man, Ragnarok, Captain Marvel, Far From Home, Black Widow, Eternals, Multiverse of Madness, and then the worst movies in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe so far, are Thor the Dark World, Ant-Man the Wasp, Thor Love and Thunder, Quantumania, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and the Marvels. Guys, I feel like this is a pretty definitive ranking. Leave a comment. Tell me if I'm crazy. Also, huge surprise for you guys. Film